Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. It is time to share the worst makeup products that I tried in 2021. I tried a lot of makeup products this year, and I actually discovered a lot of amazing products and brands that I just fell in love with. So I can't wait to share those with you guys in my next video that will actually go up on Tuesday. But today I wanted to share the worst products that I tried this year. A lot of them were a little bit more expensive, maybe high-end brands, so I felt like they were extra disappointing. And for whatever reason, well, for very specific reasons, which I'll share in the video, they didn't work for me. There is a chance they could work for you, so if you have a different skin type or different preferences and I think they'll work for you, I'll be sure to let you know in today's video, but I'll also list a couple of my favorite alternatives that I prefer over these in the description box below. I try to include a high-end alternative and a drugstore alternative if it's available, so I'll make sure to put those in the description box, but let's jump into it. Let's chat about the products that didn't work for me this year. So at this point, I don't think I have any of these products left in my collection. If something doesn't work for me, I give it to my mom or one of my sisters to see if they can get it to work for them. But I'll put some pictures on the screen for you guys as I talk about the products. So the first thing I wanted to share with you is the KVD Vegan Beauty Good Apple Foundation. This went viral on TikTok. Everyone was raving about it. It was sold out everywhere. When I initially tried this product, I loved how it looked on my skin because it had really good coverage. So it really did even my skin tone out. It covered acne scarring, redness, but it didn't wear well on my skin throughout the day. I do have oily skin, and I have heard people who have dry skin say they really enjoy it, but I think there are a lot of other hydrating foundations out there that look better on the skin throughout the day compared to the KVD Vegan Beauty one. This foundation just looks very heavy on the skin. It looks a little bit cakey. If you do go in with a beauty sponge and kind of shear it out, it looks a little bit better, but I just found that throughout the day it would settle into my fine lines, it would enhance texture. If you deal with any of that or you just make a lot of facial expressions throughout the day, the foundation will move around. I had a hard time getting it to set into place. Even if I would go in with powder on top, it just ended up moving around and it didn't really look very good after a few hours. So initially it looked flawless. It was amazing if I was taking a photo or maybe filming a YouTube video, but as far as real life goes, it's not something that I really liked to wear because as it wore throughout the day, my skin just looked very textured. There were so many fine lines. It looked heavy and cakey. It just made my skin look older than it is. Also, it is not a transfer-proof foundation by any means. So if I was going out and wearing a mask, it would just completely wear off, get all over the mask, and it would look like a mess. So for me, that was definitely a fail. I know there are some people who enjoyed it. It was viral on TikTok, and a lot of people really enjoyed it on TikTok, but I feel like as far as real life goes, it just wasn't very practical for me personally. The other foundation that was just a fail for me this year was the Milani Cream to Powder Foundation. Now, a lot of people say that one is actually a dupe for the KVD Vegan Beauty Foundation, and I can definitely see the similarities. I actually tried the Milani Foundation before KVD Vegan Beauty ever released their foundation. So I thought it was interesting because I didn't put that comparison together in my mind initially, but after people were saying it was a dupe, I could definitely see why. I don't think it's the exact same, but I do think it might be a good alternative. The coverage with the Milani Foundation is not quite as intense, so I do find it to be a little bit more practical if you're not someone who needs super intense full coverage every single day. The issue with the Milani Foundation is that this one made my skin look dry, which is kind of weird because my skin is really oily. I've never really had a foundation make my skin look dry, but this one really clung to any, again, texture or just any issues that I have with my skin. Because for me, I do deal with breakouts, I deal with texture, so I don't have perfectly smooth skin. And there are foundations that will kind of smooth over those areas and then other foundations that will really enhance them. And the Milani foundation definitely enhanced them and made it look like my skin was dry and more textured than it really is. Okay, let's talk about some cheek products. I was so excited to try the Kosas Sun Show Moisturizing Baked Bronzer. That was probably one of the top products on my list this year. I think it was actually released in 2020, but I don't buy a lot of new bronzers because I go through them very, very slowly, and I feel like bronzers just never work out for me. And unfortunately, that one did not work for me either. The bronzer that I was kind of comparing it to in my mind was the Milani Baked Bronzer, which works so well. It's blendable, it's smooth, it gives your skin like a natural glow, and I just didn't get any of that from the Kosas bronzer. It has such mixed reviews. Some people love it and say it's the best thing ever, and some people just aren't impressed by it, and I really didn't like it. I felt like it was lacking pigment. I did get the lightest shade. I think there are only 3 shades, but it just didn't show up on my skin at all. It definitely didn't give my skin like a natural glow. It's funny because some of the reviews say their bronzer has like a ton of glitter in it, and mine didn't even have like a subtle shimmer. There really was no no sheen on my skin at all. And I don't know why they describe it as a moisturizing product because I didn't get that either. I wanted it to work for me. I don't know why. Like sometimes I just try products and I am determined to get them to work for me no matter what. And that was one where I had to be like, it's just not for me. I think I gave it to one of my sisters to see if they would like it. I'll just stick with my Milani Baked Bronzer. That one is like $9. It works so much better. And unfortunately, the Kosas one was a fail for me. Another cheek product that I was so excited about was the Anastasia Beverly Hills Iced Out Highlighter. I heard a lot of people compare that to the Amrezy formula, and the Amrezy formula is one of my favorites. I want them to release like an entire line of those highlighters. I think that formula is so good. And I still have some people say it is the same formula, but I think the difference is it's a different texture. The Amrezy is like a very smooth, soft texture, and the Iced Out Highlighter kind of has like an imprint on it, and because of that, it just doesn't apply to the skin in the same way. So for me, every time I used it, I felt like no matter how much I applied, it wasn't showing up on my skin, and not necessarily the color. Like I couldn't get the product to transfer to the brush and then get it to transfer from the brush to my skin no matter what I did. And then on top of that, I wasn't sold on the color. I didn't think that it looked that flattering on my skin tone. Overall, I couldn't get it to work for me. I tried that one so many times because again, it's one of those products that just had a hold on me. I wanted to love it. I wanted it to work because I love the original Amrezy so much. And in the end, I think like back in maybe like August or September, I just decided to declutter it because I just wasn't reaching for it. And when I did use it, I wasn't getting the results that I wanted. So unfortunately, I have to count that one as a fail. So I feel like 2021 was the year of blush, specifically cream blush, but a lot of brands did do powder blushes as well. And every time I turned around, there was a new blush formula coming out from a different brand. And I tried a lot of blushes. I wouldn't even consider myself like a big blush person. I like to wear it, but honestly, it's not like the category of makeup that I get the most excited about. But I think I just fell into the hype this year, and I did try out a lot of formulas, some that I loved and a lot that didn't work for me. So the one formula, again, that was like the biggest disappointment to me because I was so excited about it was the Rare Beauty Stay Vulnerable Melting Cream Blush. Again, this has very mixed reviews and a lot of people love it, so there is a chance that it could work for you. There are things about this blush that I love. I love the packaging. I love the design. I think it is so perfect for on the go. It's very easy to apply. It has a really nice texture. It's like a very soft, almost like melty, soft texture. So as you apply it on your finger and then apply it on your cheeks, it goes on so beautifully. You can use your fingers and just tap it on, or you can use a brush, but it just doesn't last on my skin no matter what I do. I've worn it under foundation, on top of powder, without powder, and no matter what, it fades within like 10 or 15 minutes. It basically disappears. I tried it out for the first time in like a testing new makeup video, and you can actually see it just completely fade on camera. And again, that just happens every single time I use it. There are so many cream blushes out there that just stay in place better on my oily skin that one just did not work for me, and I'm so sad about it because I love the colors in the line. I love the texture of the blush, but it doesn't last on my skin no matter what I do. I know this is the worst products of 2021, but what was your favorite cream blush formula? Because so many brands released cream blushes this year. I would love to know what's your number one, the one that stays in place so well. So what was I going to mention next? There's another cream blush, or I guess a serum blush that didn't work for me. The NYX Bear With Me Luminous Cheek Serum Blushes just didn't work. First of all, they only had 3 shades, which between the shades, there was a pretty good range, but I feel like for NYX, they're usually on top of their shade ranges. They could have done a few more. So I purchased one. The color was really pretty, but it lifted my foundation so badly. I feel like that's the case with a lot of serum blushes because they're very liquidy. They tend to just remove all of the foundation underneath. And some people say wear them under foundation, but that shade was so light that it wouldn't really show up underneath my foundation. And I just prefer to apply blush on top of foundation once my base is kind of done. But the other issue, other than the fact that, it erased my foundation, was that it was very sticky. It was a little bit thicker than other serum foundations, so it didn't necessarily blend that well. And when I had my hair down, it would stick to the blush. It never really settled. So it felt like there was just like a wet, tacky blush on my skin all day long. So for me, that one was a fail. There are just so many good blushes out there that I just didn't even want to try to make it work after I used it a few times and I couldn't get it to work for me. I actually have two powder blushes to share with you. I feel like usually I can get powder blushes to work for me. I don't feel like it's too difficult these days to make a really good powder blush, but there were two that I tried that I was really disappointed in, especially because they were high-end blushes that were a little bit more expensive. The first one is from Patrick Ta. This is the Monochrome Moment Velvet Blush in the shade She's Sincere. So this was a little bit more expensive. It was $32, which for me is a little bit of a splurge. I like high-end makeup, but I'm just a big drugstore fan. I have $3 blushes that are amazing, $8 blushes that I love. So for $32, I feel like my expectations are a little bit higher. First of all, Patrick Ta has beautiful packaging. The colors in the product lines are absolutely gorgeous. And I do feel like maybe if I chose a slightly deeper shade, I would have enjoyed it a little bit more, but the shade She's Sincere is just like a light, soft, peachy shade. It's the kind of shade that I would wear on an everyday basis. It just didn't show up on my skin. It was lacking pigment, and I could build it up. I could sit there and apply it over and over, and I just couldn't get it to show up very well. So initially when I tried it, I was like, oh, I kind of like it because it's like a barely there color, but you know, I think my bronzer was a little bit heavy that day because the next time I wore it, I felt like I didn't see it on my skin at all. I've read the reviews on Sephora's website and some people have said the same thing. The blushes just lack pigment. And I do like very subtle blushes, so I don't mind a blush that's, you know, a little bit softer, but for me, it has to have a little bit of pigment. It has to actually show up on the skin. So maybe a deeper shade would work. I know that Patrick Ta has blush duos that have like a cream and a powder, and I've heard nothing but good things about those. So I do want to try one of those and maybe give them another shot. I don't know if the powder formula in those duos is the same as the powder formula in the singles, but I think I might try them out in 2022 and see how they work. I had a very similar issue with the Huda Beauty Glowish blush. Again, I have the lightest shade. I just bought this one fairly recently. This one does have a little bit more pigment. I could actually get the color to show up on my skin, so that wasn't as much of an issue, but I do have to build it up quite a bit. I think that I should have probably gone with a deeper shade as well, but you know, these days I just kind of wear more natural blushes for my skin tone. So even though the berries always look really pretty, I don't know how much use I would get out of them practically. But I would say if you do want the blush to really show up without having to layer it on, maybe go with a slightly deeper shade than you are originally thinking, or than you were originally thinking, or what you would typically wear. The other issue is that this blush claims to have like a soft focus glow. It doesn't claim to give you like an intense glow or be super luminous, but just like a soft focus glow, which sounds perfect for everyday wear. And I don't know what I'm missing, but there is just no glow at all. It's one of the most matte blushes that I've tried. So I guess I'm just confused by the description. I bought it based on the description because it sounded like my kind of blush. I love like a natural luminosity. That one is just very lackluster, both in pigment and in glow. There really isn't a glow. So for me, it kind of feels like a blush that I would get at the drugstore like 10 years ago before they improved their formulas. It just doesn't show up on my skin. It feels dry and chalky, and it was a big fail for me. Let's talk about a few eyeshadow palettes. I am going to film a video either ranking my palettes or sharing the best and the worst. I haven't actually sat down and decided which ones I'm going to share as the best or the worst in that video, but there were a few palettes that I tried this year that were definitely fails that I've talked about on my channel, but I thought I would share in this video as well. The first one is the Natasha Denona Zendo palette. I don't think that I've tried a Natasha Denona palette that didn't work for me since she originally released those minis, and I think at this point she's reformulated them. A lot of her minis work really well, but I've never tried one of her like $65 palettes that didn't work. They always work really, really well for me. The quality is always amazing. But when I tried the Zendo palette, I was just so surprised because a lot of the shadows were very patchy, really hard to work with. I used it on camera for the first time in a Get Ready With Me. I actually had to wipe it off and start over because it looked so bad and I couldn't get it to work for me. It has some colors that are beautiful, that look amazing on the eyes, but there are quite a few shades in there that just look terrible. They look patchy, they are hard to work with, and I feel like for $65, you just can't have inconsistencies like that in an eyeshadow palette. Now again, I know there are some people who didn't have any issues with it, but for me, there were probably like 4 or 5 shades that were consistently bad every time I used it. So again, I passed that along to one of my sisters or my mom. I can't remember who got that one, but I almost felt bad giving it to them just because it wasn't a good palette. But again, things work differently for everyone, so there is a chance it could work for you. I liked a lot of the green tones in there, a lot of the cooler tones, and those were the shades that ultimately didn't work for me. I feel like it's okay because there are so many other Natasha Denona palettes in my collection that I love and that works so well. I was just surprised because for the price tag, it really wasn't her normal quality. Another palette that I tried this year was the Buxom White Russian palette. I did get this one in the mail as PR, so I decided to try it out because in the past when I've tried Buxom eyeshadows, they've always worked well. And then it had been a while, I want to say maybe a few years since I tried one of their palettes, and I was actually surprised by how bad the quality was. Now, first of all, it did have 2 of the Wanderlust primer infused blushes in it, and that is one of my favorite blush formulas. It's so good. I've talked about it for years, but the blush formula in that palette is very different than the blush formula in the single blushes. The palette also had 6 eyeshadows, and I just found the eyeshadows to be just some of the worst that I tried this year. There just really is no excuse for bad eyeshadows at this point. There are so many eyeshadow palettes out there, some that are $3 or $4 that perform well, that I think when a brand is charging like $30, $40 for a palette, it better perform well. And the shadows were just lacking pigment. They were dry, patchy, hard to work with. And I know that not everyone prefers like a super intense pigmented palette. Some people like something a little bit more buildable that they can add so they can get the desired intensity. But even still, that one just didn't show up on the skin very well. There's like one deep shade in there, but it was so dry and hard to work with that it was one of the worst palettes that I tried this year. So I don't recommend trying that. They actually released a collaboration with Ash K. Home that was so good. That palette was 10 times better than the White Russian palette. So I know that Buxom can do eyeshadow really, really well. I just felt like the quality within the White Russian palette was not worth the price tag, and they probably could have done something a little bit better. It feels like they maybe took the cheap way out with that one. I don't know for sure. I just know that they've consistently released really good formulas in the past, and that palette just didn't feel like a Buxom palette. It's kind of a similar story with the Urban Decay Naked Cyber palette. I love the Urban Decay Naked palettes. I know they get a lot of hate on YouTube, but I still really enjoy them. And I like the direction that Urban Decay has taken with them. They incorporate neutrals, but they also add a little bit of colors. So for me, I feel like they are perfect for the everyday average consumer who might not wear color on an everyday basis, but like to maybe add it in every once in a while. I feel like you either love them or you hate them. I do still love them, and I feel like the quality has been really good for the past few releases. But Urban Decay's Naked Cyber just was not up to par. The quality as a whole was very, very inconsistent. There were a few shadows in that palette that performed really well. I did an entire video on it, and some of them blended out so well. Some of the Transformer shades were absolutely gorgeous and unique and interesting, but some of them were so dry and just so bad. Very, very chalky, didn't perform well, and I just feel like, again, when you're spending like $50 on a palette, it's just not acceptable to have multiple shadows in the palette that don't perform well. When it comes to Naked Honey or Naked Wild West, all of the shadows in those palettes work really, really well, regardless of whether or not you like the color story. I think when it comes to Naked Cyber, there were quite a few shadows that didn't work well, and on top of that, the color story isn't something that a lot of people necessarily loved. I do feel like it's a nice palette to have in your collection if you want to switch it up from time to time. The shadows look really nice layered on top of jewel tones or deeper shades, but the Urban Decay Naked Cyber doesn't have any of those shadows in it. It has like a really deep orangey red that is kind of fun to wear, but for me, practically, it's not something I reach for very often. I've used it a handful of times, but not enough to justify the price point. I did get it in the mail as PR, but it's not something, looking back, like if I had spent my own money on it, it wouldn't have been worth it to me. So sadly, I do have to count that as one of the worst makeup products that I tried this year. The last eye product that I wanted to mention is the Milk Makeup Hydro Grip Eye Primer. The description of this product was so good. I thought it was going to be the most amazing eye primer out there. I do like the original Milk Makeup Hydro Grip Face Primer, and the eye primer just sounded really nice. It sounded like it was going to, I'm trying to think of the description, lock my eyeshadow into place, make my eye area look a little bit more smooth, and just kind of create a nice even base for my eye makeup. I feel like that's the description of every eyeshadow primer out there, but because it had the whole Hydro Grip brand or, marketing behind it, I fell for it. And I tried it out and it did not work for me. Whenever I use that primer underneath my eyeshadow looks terrible every single time. I can use the most amazing palette in my collection that just looks flawless every single time I use it on top of that eyeshadow primer, and it will look terrible. It will look patchy and uneven. It will look like I don't know what I'm doing or that I'm using the worst eyeshadow palette in the world. It just looks bad every single time. I'm almost done. I just have 2 more products to talk about. I was, again, so excited about the Urban Decay All-Nighter Loose Setting Powder. There were so many releases this year that I just could not wait to try, but this one let me down. I love the Urban Decay All-Nighter Pressed Powder. They have like a waterproof translucent powder that works so well to lock your makeup into place. And I kind of go back and forth between pressed powders and loose powders, so the pressed powder works really well for me. There wasn't really a need for me to have the loose powder in my collection, but I think at the time I was reaching for loose powders more than pressed powders. Also, I was on a major hunt this year to find a replacement for the Too Faced Peach Perfect powder, so I decided to try it out, and it just didn't work for me. It did not work as well as the pressed version. My skin looked really oily after a few hours. So if you have oily skin like I do and you're looking for a powder to lock your makeup into place, I would skip over the loose version. You could totally go with the pressed version. That one does work really well, but again, there are so many other powders out there. I'll list some of my favorites in the description box below. It also had the net packaging, and whenever a powder has that net packaging, I can't figure out how to use it. It's kind of hard to dump a little bit into the cap, and if you put your brush directly into the net, it just kicks up a ton of powder, and I feel like you waste a lot of it. So it didn't work for me. I don't know if I've heard anyone talk about it or rave about it, but I would say save your money and either skip it and go with a different option or go with the pressed version. The last product that I want to mention is the worst face primer that I tried this year. It is the Milani No Pore Zone Mattifying Face Primer. I did talk about this a lot on my channel, so I'll keep it brief. This is supposed to be a mattifying primer that just kind of blurs your pores. It does blur your pores really, really well, so if that is your main concern, you might like it, but it's not mattifying. It has a very slippery silicone type feel to it, so your foundation just kind of slips around. It will definitely slip off your face if you have oily skin, and it never really settles. It just kind of, makes its way into fine lines and enhances texture. And overall, whenever I wore that underneath foundation, my foundation looked like a mess after a few hours. So again, there are so many other foundations out there that are mattifying and smoothing. I'll list some of my favorites in the description box, but I don't recommend that one if you have oily skin. Okay, you guys, those are the worst makeup products that I tried this year. I'm hoping that in 2022, I don't have quite as many fails. I think the extra disappointing part was that a lot of these are products that I was so excited to try. Like, they were at the top of my list, and unfortunately, they just didn't work for me. So I hope that next year that won't happen quite as much, but because I do review makeup, I feel like it's inevitable. But anyway, there are a lot of products I tried that were so good, so I can't wait to share those with you guys in my video on Tuesday. So definitely stay tuned. That will be up very soon, and I will see you guys then. Bye.